Hello everybody, how are you folks doing? In this video, my name is Armando. In this video, I'll be taking a look at Hawaii's rear view mirror and taking a look at Buck's Portuguese sweetbread. But I grew up in Hawaii with Buck's Portuguese sweetbread. I remember, especially at St. Patrick's, we always had fundraisers, and we always sold loaves of sweetbread. I would go around the neighborhood, and it was very popular and easy to sell to my neighbors. But our school always sold that, and we weren't the only ones. A lot of other schools did that too. A lot of organizations did that. Anyways, let's get started. Hawaii's rearview mirror, Buck's Portuguese sweetbread. Now, as I mentioned before, it was a very popular thing to sell, especially for people in Hawaii. It left a lasting taste in customers' mouths. I'm showing a picture of it's also called a Hawaiian sweetbread. And I remember Buck's sweetbread. It used to be, like I said, a great fundraiser back in the 50s. So everybody wondered whatever happened to Buck's Bakery. And as I mentioned to you also, St. Patrick's, we always sold it. Now I'm showing a picture of Freddie Buck. He was the one that owned that. He retired after 55 years of baking some of Hawaii's best sweetbread. And you have to treat, and this is what he said, you have to treat the dough like a baby. That was quote unquote what Freddie Buck said. Now, many in the islands remember Freddie Buck Wu Lam, that was his full name, 1911 to 1990, known as Freddie Buck. Besides being a sweetbread king, he was also a champion boxer, and that's something I never knew about him. It was that he was also a boxer. Now, Lam was involved in baking for more than half a century as a proprietor a Buck's Bake Shop of Mo'ili'ili, where he baked hundreds of thousands of loaves of bread, Buck's sweetbread. And his shop occupied the building that is now run as Chiang Mai Thai Cuisine at 2239 South King Street, which is next to the Stadium Park, which in his time was the heavily visited Honolulu Stadium. Now, Buck was the territory's first flyweight amateur boxing champion in the early 1930s, and he fought in many matches on the mainland. That's why I never really knew too much about him as far as that part. His father had a bakery in Kaka'ako, a thriving residential community 100 years ago. The family had 12 children and lived in a house behind the bakery. Now, Buck's baking career began as a 7-year-old helper in his father's bakery in 1918. Okay, so he started very, very young, at a very, very young age. Now, his father taught him how to make sweetbread, an art he learned from early Portuguese settlers. Now, the Portuguese women used to bless the dough and mark it with a cross. As you know, a lot of Portuguese are Catholic and Christian, and that's why I make a sign of the cross. Buck said, "We continue to do that right up to the time I closed my shop," and that's what he said. Now, 15 years later, at 22, he rented his father's basement for $14 a month and set up his own baking operation. Eventually, he opened a restaurant in Kalihi before opening a bakery of his own, then next door to the old Honolulu Stadium. Okay, so Now, in 1959, Buck pioneered Portuguese sweetbread benefit sales for schools, clubs, and athletic. Now, to raise funds for projects, sports uniforms, and travel. Now, this is where I remember, because in '59 I'm already 6 years old. I'm in school, and that's how I remember our school always trying to sell Portuguese sweetbread. Now, if it hadn't been for Buck's sweetbread, a lot of the kids on this island wouldn't have athletic equipment and uniforms, one resident said in 1972, when Buck sold his bakery and retired after 55 years in the business. Now later on, other, like Times and Foodland, they have, they if you buy, you can, they give points in schools, and they help out the schools today, and that's what he did back then, way back then, to the benefit for the schools, which is being carried on today by those, like I said, Foodland and Times. Well, during its heyday, Buck's Bake Shop churned out more than 800 loaves of sweetbread every 2 hours and end up to 25,000 loaves weekly for benefit sweetbread sales. That's quite a bit. Now, Lamb had his signature sweetbread contained, and this is what he said about his sweetbread. He said it contained pure butter, eggs, and milk. Most bakeries mass-produce their products quickly. Buck's, in contrast, let his dough rise for 18 to 20 hours. Then it was machine kneaded for 2.5 hours. I tell you what, the sweetbread today that I buy in the stores can't even come close to the kind of the Buck sweetbread that I ate when I was a young man growing up in Hawaii. You don't get that kind of sweetbread anymore, not today. The result was a sought-after, tasty, rich, firm loaf that he guaranteed would stay fresh for a month. Now, baking is an art. That's what he used to say. You have to treat the bread like, quote unquote, like a baby. He was an early bird, starting his day at 3 a.m. Wow. He used to get up early. He was also known as Buck was also known as a very generous man. A friend, Nelson Ewan, said Buck was my grandmother's brother-in-law. As a child, he would bring loaves of sweetbreads to my grandmother's house and give it to all the families. Now, my grandmother had 9 kids. He would drop off 20 to 30 loaves of sweetbread. On special occasions like Thanksgiving, he would bake pumpkin pies and other specialty pies and give them away. That's very generous of him. When he dropped off the bread to my grandmother's house, he would give us kids $2 each. He was such a generous man. After he retired, I would go, and this is what the friend is saying, Nelson Ewan. He said after he retired, I would go to his house to learn how to make his sweetbread. It was a difficult task because his recipe had to be broken down to a small batch. While we waited for the bread to rise, we would sit at the table and have cookies and milk and talk story. People would come to his house and he would sometimes give them a massage, since he had been a boxer and had strong hands. Uncle Buck, as we would call him, was a kind and friendly guy. Well, that's the story of Buck's sweetbread. I hope you enjoyed it. Very interesting person. You don't see these kinds of people nowadays. Things especially with the big box stores coming to Hawaii. These kinds of Small mom and pop businesses are few and far between. You don't see too much of that nowadays. But anyway, that's the story of the Buck Sweetbread. I hope you enjoyed it. Mahalo for watching, and ahui ho.